specifically for the different economy, was I launched that book in the historic Wall Street Church, Wall Street Trinity Church. You've surely all seen it, at least in the picture. It's that traditional cathedral that looks right down Wall Street. So we played that song, launched the book from the pulpit of that church, looking down Wall Street, bring down the wall. Anyhow, the challenge before us is to navigate the transition to a new economy that supports ecological balance between humans and nature, that supports the sharing of Earth's resources to assure every person access to the essentials of a healthy, happy life, and a living democracy to secure the rights and voice of every person in the decisions that shape their lives. That's what our work is about. And those who engage the struggle participate in a human awakening to the reality that life exists only in community. I'll not go too far into the physics of that today, but if you study it, life can only exist in community. It's built right into the physics of how life manages energy. And it revolves the active engagement of every living being in the capture, exchange, and sharing of energy, nutrients, and water to the benefit of the whole. Well, that's part of the original instructions. It's embedded in the very being of life. So this brings us to the biosphere, that extraordinary planetary web of life that weaves all of Earth's local ecosystems into a seamless, interdependent, and ultimately cooperative whole. Now, in a fit of adolescent hubris, we humans have confused individual autonomy with personal liberty. We sought to liberate ourselves from the responsibilities of life and community. And in so doing, we created economies that reduce caring human relationships to soulless financial exchange. And we've structured our physical spaces around buildings and auto-dependent transport systems that wall us off from one another and from nature. We've created a global economy that isolates us from the sources of our food, water, materials, and manufactured goods, and leaves us dependent on corporate-controlled global supply chains that are wasteful, unstable, unaccountable, and environmentally and socially destructive. The isolation is psychologically, socially, and environmentally devastating. Living in isolation from nature, we fail to recognize that we are expropriating Earth's finite stores of fossil fuels to dominate, overwhelm, control, and expropriate the life-serving generative processes of the biosphere. All in order to grow those financial assets of the richest 1%. It is a suicidal act of collective insanity.
Yes, it is.
We must now rediscover the truth that has defined the values of high-functioning indigenous societies from the beginning of time. The living earth is sacred. It is beyond price, and it is not for sale. Earth's biosphere has the potential to provide for the livelihood needs of all people in perpetuity if we organize ourselves to live in a balanced and harmonious partnership with its natural structures and dynamics. Our future depends, therefore, on replacing the institutions and the cultural norms of the global suicide economy with a global system of locally rooted, self-reliant, living economies that interconnect globally to share their surplus, ideas, technology, and culture in a spirit of mutual respect for one another's needs and values. In other words, we should share information, communication, but our basic means of livelihood should be local and learning to live within our own means. This, of course, creates a natural connection back to the land and to our responsibility to manage it in perpetuity. Now, in the suicide economy, we ask, when we're making a decision, this is what I learned in business school, learn how to do this. Ask, what is the financial rate of return? In the living economies, we seek to create, we must ask, what would nature do?
Yes.
That is a foundational defining question. If you're familiar with Janine Benyus and her work on biomimicry, that is her defining frame. What would nature do? We've got so much to learn from that. Now, to work in partnership with the biosphere, we must understand its structure and dynamics. 3.5 billion years in the making, the biosphere self-organizes in a dynamic, constantly evolving, locally and globally adaptive process to optimize the sustainable use of Earth's available nutrients, energy, and water in support of life. I was so fascinated by the presentation this morning on water. You know, this is part of learning where we live, learning how nature operates. It's part of building that awareness so we begin to live in harmony with those dynamics. The key to the success of the biosphere is a complex and highly sophisticated fractal structure of nested, self-reliant, progressively ever smaller scale ecosystems, each exquisitely adapted to its particular place on Earth, all to optimize the capture of energy, water, and nutrients to sustain matter in a living, choice-making state. And to this end, of creating this incredible system of life, trillions upon trillions of individual living cells, organisms, and communities of organisms engage in an exquisite, continuing dance of cooperative exchange. Their health and vitality depend on processes of cooperative self-organization in which each species learns to meet its own needs in ways that simultaneously serve the needs of others. The more diverse and cooperative the biocommunity, the greater its capacity to innovate and the greater its resilience in the face of crisis. This system is local everywhere and organizes from the bottom up to then create a holistic, resilient global system. Exactly the opposite of the way we organize our global corporate economy. Self-reliance is a key to the system's ability to absorb and contain most system disturbances locally with minimal overall system disruption. There's no global financial collapse in nature. Partly because there is literally no equivalent of money in nature. It's truly, you know, you think about it, money exists only in the human mind. It has no existence outside of our mind. So long as each local ecological subsystem balances its consumption and reproduction with local resource availability, the global biosphere remains in a healthy and dynamic sustainable balance with Earth's total water, energy, and nutrient resources. You know, we cannot bring ourselves into balance with the planet through decision making somewhere out there in that cloud we call the global financial system. They have to be made right here in the local community, doing exactly the kinds of things that you're learning to do through your experiments here. We're engaged in a struggle between two competing economies. The greed-driven, money-serving corporate Wall Street economy, which features publicly traded limited liability corporations that recognize only financial values, recognize no attachment to place, and accept no responsibility for the individual and social environmental consequences of their actions. Is it any wonder why we're in such deep trouble? But at the foundation of it, the issues are moral and spiritual. Discovering the basic values embedded in those original instructions. Now, our hope for the future lies with the creative genius of millions of people like yourselves. People are mobilizing across America and around the world to take back their lives and their countries from Wall Street by building strong, democratic, community-rooted, market-based, life-serving Main Street economies. I mentioned market economy. You know, we're supposed to think that Wall Street represents the market economy. It's really important to keep in mind, I'm kind of a follower of Adam Smith, and if you really read Adam Smith, you're aware that when he talks about a market economy,
What he has in mind is something that looks rather like your local farmer's market. Doesn't look at all like an economy run by Walmart, Goldman Sachs, and Monsanto. It's about local people organizing to produce for their needs and meeting for open exchange in a local marketplace. That's the market economy, and that's very much the foundation on which we're building here. Now, I want to return briefly to that gathering of indigenous leaders that I mentioned earlier. I left that gathering with a deep appreciation for how much we of modern Western culture have to learn from the traditional wisdom that elders of the world's indigenous peoples have handed down through the generations. Throughout the assault, where those of us from the quote, modern or mainstream culture have tried to destroy indigenous cultures, in spite of that, the wisdom keepers have maintained the original wisdom. And here's some of what I gathered from our exchange on the Rockefeller estate as it relates to time, relationships, and place. The indigenous view of time, and if any of you from indigenous communities here, if I make any errors in your understanding, please help me improve my understanding afterwards. Time is life, and is experienced through the rhythms of life's daily, seasonal, and generational circular flow. Responsible human decision-making seeks to assure life's continued healthful flow and balance now and for generations to come. A high-performing economy within this frame is one that supports the health and happiness of people living in harmonious balance with one another and nature. And economic performance should be assessed accordingly with measures of the health and well-being and continuity of life, not based on indicators of how much money we're making. Relationships. All beings are related and interconnected. And it is our individual human duty to recognize and honor the rights of all beings, including the river, the rock, and the glacier. Mother Earth provides our means of living. Her bounty is a gift that we received in common and must share, respect, and care for in common. None among us created that bounty, and no one has a right to claim it for their exclusive personal benefit. We are each entitled only to what we need and bear a sacred responsibility to give back or share the rest, all the while respecting the natural balance of creation and what indigenous people call the original instructions, a higher law to which all human laws are inherently subordinate. The view of place. Earth is our sacred mother. Each being has intrinsic value and its rightful place within the interconnected whole. Our personal and collective connection to our place on Earth is sacred and inalienable. Individual human identity is linked to and defined by a deep and enduring relationship to our place and to the vocation through which we each individually sustain ourselves while fulfilling our responsibility to and for the community that in turn sustains us. I find that an extraordinarily beautiful frame. I believe there's good reason why the wisdom at the heart of traditional indigenous worldview strikes a deep and appealing chord in the human psyche. Modern science is now telling us that what indigenous wisdom keepers have known and taught across countless generations, science is telling us that we actually evolved over millions of years to live and prosper in community with one another in nature. Science is finding that our happiness and sense of well-being, whether we're indigenous or part of the Western culture, makes no difference. We're still the same inherent human beings. That our happiness and sense of well-being depend in substantial measure on our connection to nature and a caring community. In a sense, science is now telling us that the original instructions held in trust for us all by the indigenous wisdom keepers are in effect hardwired into the human brain.
So be it.
And we're just, many of us are just beginning to wake up.